They removed him in minutes. No evidence, no investigation. Just a quiet black student accused of stealing a life-saving medical device, and a room full of powerful voices deciding his fate without hesitation. In that moment, the exhibition became a courtroom, and Darius Coleman was already guilty. But when the system they trusted failed in front of everyone, the man they silenced stepped forward, not to argue, but to prove the truth live. And in the next 10 minutes, the real verdict would flip everything. Before we begin, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? And if you believe some heroes are willing to look guilty to save the innocent, this story is for you. Chicago woke up under a ceiling of low gray clouds, the kind that pressed down on the skyline and made the glass towers look colder than they were. The elevated train roared past in the distance, its metallic echo cutting through the morning air. Wind slipped between buildings, carrying the smell of rain that hadn't fallen yet. People moved quickly, collars up, eyes forward. In this city, no one waited for anyone. Darius Coleman walked against that current. Darius Coleman was a 23-year-old African-American biomedical engineering student. He stood a little over 6 feet tall, but carried himself with a quiet, almost shrinking posture, as if trying not to take up space. His build was lean from years of long days and longer nights, his deep brown skin marked faintly by exhaustion rather than age. His face was defined by high cheekbones and tired, observant eyes that missed very little. His hair was short, tightly coiled, rarely styled. He simply didn't have time. He wore the same rotation of clothes most days, a worn gray hoodie under a university jacket, jeans that had softened with age, and a backpack that had been repaired more than once with careful stitching. Everything about him suggested endurance rather than comfort. Darius had learned early in life that effort did not guarantee recognition. Growing up on the south side of Chicago, raised by a single mother who worked double shifts as a nursing assistant, he had seen what quiet sacrifice looked like. When he was 16, he spent nights sitting beside her in hospital waiting rooms, watching patients who couldn't afford timely care. That was the first time he realized. Access to medical technology wasn't equal. It was a privilege. That realization shaped him. It became the reason he chose biomedical engineering, and the reason he refused to quit, no matter how heavy life became. Every morning, he crossed the university campus like a ghost moving through someone else's world. Students gathered in clusters, laughing, checking their phones, talking about internships their parents had arranged or startups they were already connected to. Their voices were light, confident, certain of the future. Darius passed through them unnoticed, his gaze forward, his pace steady. He attended lectures, took notes, answered questions when called upon, but never volunteered. Not because he didn't know the answers, but because he had learned that attention often came with scrutiny, and scrutiny, in his experience, rarely worked in his favor. When the sun set and the campus lights flickered on, Darius's day was far from over. By night, he returned to the same buildings, this time pushing a janitor's cart. The uniform was simple: navy shirt, dark work pants, gloves. Under the artificial lighting of empty hallways, he cleaned classrooms where, hours earlier, professors had delivered lectures he could barely stay awake through. He wiped whiteboards filled with equations he already understood. He emptied trash bins filled with coffee cups and half-finished notes. At night, he wasn't a student. He was invisible. Except to one person. Lena Brooks noticed him before she ever spoke to him. Lena Brooks was a 22-year-old Latina journalism student. She was of average height, with a slim, agile frame that moved with quiet purpose. Her warm, olive skin contrasted with expressive, dark brown eyes that seemed to always be observing, always processing. Her long, dark hair was usually tied back in a loose ponytail, strands escaping whenever she got too focused to notice. She had a habit of writing things down the moment she noticed them, details others ignored. Her small notebook was always in her hand, its pages filled with fragments of conversations, observations, and questions she hadn't answered yet. Lena wasn't just curious. She was driven. During her first year of college, her father lost his job unexpectedly, forcing her family into financial uncertainty. That moment reshaped how she saw the world. She began to notice the people who slipped through the cracks, the ones who worked twice as hard and were seen half as much. That was when she decided to become a journalist. Not for headlines, but for stories that were overlooked. Her current project was something she hadn't told anyone about, a documentary titled Invisible Students. It focused on people who lived double lives, students by day, workers by night, trying to survive in a system that rarely acknowledged them. And Darius fit that story perfectly. She first noticed him leaving the engineering lab late one night, long after everyone else had gone. At first, she thought he was just another overworked student, but then she saw him again, later that same night, pushing a janitor's cart down the hallway. That contradiction stayed with her, so she started paying attention. Across campus, another figure existed in a completely different world. Ethan Whitmore. Ethan Whitmore was 24, tall and sharply built, with a presence that drew attention without effort. His posture was confident, his movements precise. His fair skin, neatly styled sandy blonde hair, and sharp jawline gave him the polished appearance of someone accustomed to being seen and respected. His blue-gray eyes carried a calm, almost calculated focus. He dressed differently from most students, not extravagantly, but intentionally. Clean lines, fitted jackets, expensive but understated. The kind of style that signaled status without needing to prove it. Ethan had grown up in privilege. His father was a major donor to the university, a man whose name appeared on buildings and scholarship programs. Doors had always opened for Ethan, not because he demanded it, but because they were already unlocked. Unlike Darius, Ethan didn't have to prove he belonged. He simply did. Professors recognized him. Administrators greeted him by name. Opportunities seemed to find him rather than the other way around, and yet, beneath that composed exterior, Ethan carried something else. Pressure. Not visible, not spoken, but present. The expectation to succeed, to maintain reputation, to never fall short of what his name represented. Their worlds existed on the same campus, but they never intersected, not yet. Back in the engineering building, long after midnight, Darius moved quietly through the lab. The janitor's cart was parked near the door, but he wasn't cleaning. He was building. Spread across a small corner workstation was a collection of components: circuit boards, sensors, wires, a partially assembled casing. Nothing about it looked expensive. In fact, everything about it suggested the opposite: improvised, reused, carefully chosen based on necessity, not convenience. Darius leaned forward, adjusting a connection with steady hands. This was the part of his life no one saw. A low-cost medical diagnostic device, portable, affordable, designed to detect early-stage infections using minimal resources. He didn't talk about it, didn't present it, didn't even tell his classmates. Because he understood something most didn't. Ideas didn't matter until they were undeniable. And until then, silence was safer. He tested the device, watching the small interface flicker to life. Numbers appeared. Data stabilized. A small breath escaped him. Half relief, half disbelief. It worked. Not perfectly, but enough. Outside the lab, unnoticed, Lena stood partially hidden near the hallway corner. She wasn't recording yet, just watching. Her instincts told her this moment mattered, that whatever Darius was building wasn't just another student project. Inside, Darius powered the device down, carefully placing each component back into his bag. He moved with precision, as if every piece mattered, because to him, it did. Every part represented time he didn't have, money he couldn't spare, hope he couldn't afford to lose. He turned off the lights, stepped into the hallway, and for a brief second, his eyes lifted, meeting Lena's from across the distance. Neither of them spoke, but something passed between them. Recognition, not of who they were, but of what they carried. Darius looked away first, pushing the cart forward, disappearing into the dim corridor. Lena remained still, her notebook slowly opening in her hand. She wrote one line: "He works when no one is watching." And for the first time, she realized this wasn't just a story. This was something bigger. The engineering building felt different after midnight. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, casting a pale glow across empty hallways, and the usual noise of footsteps and conversation had been replaced by a heavy silence. It was the kind of silence where small sounds, like the click of a switch or the hum of a machine, felt louder than they should. Darius Coleman moved through that silence like he belonged to it. He parked his janitor's cart near the far end of the lab corridor, glancing once over his shoulder before slipping inside the restricted workspace. The door closed softly behind him, sealing him off from the rest of the world. In here, he wasn't just surviving. He was building something that wasn't supposed to exist. On the table in front of him sat the device, compact, unfinished, and unimpressive to an untrained eye. A small casing, partially open, revealing a network of wires, microsensors, and a modest processing unit. There were no expensive components, no cutting-edge materials. Everything had been sourced carefully, often second-hand, sometimes salvaged. But what made it extraordinary wasn't how it looked. It was what it could do. Darius leaned forward, adjusting a sensor with slow, deliberate precision. His hands were steady, but his mind was moving fast. Calculating, predicting, correcting. The device was designed to detect early-stage infections through subtle biochemical markers, something that in most labs required equipment worth thousands. His version, it cost less than a textbook. That was the point. He wasn't trying to impress professors. He was trying to solve a problem no one else cared enough to solve. Behind him, the door creaked open slightly. Darius froze, then relaxed. "Still here," a low voice said. Harold Jenkins stepped into the room. Harold Jenkins was a 58-year-old African-American man, tall but slightly stooped with age, his broad shoulders carrying the weight of years of physical work. His skin was a deep, weathered brown, marked by fine lines that spoke of long days and longer nights. His hair had turned mostly gray, closely cropped, and his eyes, calm, steady, observant, held the kind of quiet understanding that didn't need words. He wore a maintenance uniform, dark blue, sleeves rolled halfway up his forearms. There was nothing remarkable about his appearance at first glance, but there was something grounded about him. Something that made people feel seen when he looked at them. Harold leaned against the doorframe, watching Darius work. "You're pushing it too hard," he said gently. Darius didn't look up. "It's close." Harold nodded, stepping further inside. He didn't ask questions, not because he wasn't curious, but because he already understood enough. Years ago, Harold had been accepted into an engineering program. He had the grades, the drive, the ability, but when his father fell ill, he left school to support his family. 1 year turned into 2. 2 turned into a lifetime. He never went back. Instead, he stayed close to the world he almost belonged to, working in the same buildings, walking the same halls, watching generations of students come and go. Most of them never noticed him, but he noticed them, especially the ones like Darius. "I checked the logs," Harold said quietly. "They're starting to notice the late access." Darius paused, his hand hovering over the device. "That a problem?" he asked. "It could be," Harold replied. "Depends on who's looking." There was a brief silence. Then Harold reached into his pocket and pulled out a small keycard. "There's a storage room on the lower level," he said. "Old equipment, nobody uses it anymore, less traffic, fewer questions." Darius looked up for the first time, meeting Harold's eyes. "Why are you helping me?" he asked. Harold smiled faintly. "Because I know what it looks like," he said, "when someone's trying to build something that matters, without anyone backing them." That was all he said, but it was enough. Across the hallway, unseen again, Lena Brooks stood partially hidden behind a corner, her camera held low. Tonight, she was recording. The small handheld camera in her grip was steady, but her breathing wasn't. She had followed Darius quietly, careful not to be noticed. At first, she told herself it was just research, just another subject for her documentary. But this didn't feel like research anymore. It felt like discovery. Through the narrow gap of the door, she captured glimpses. Darius working, Harold speaking, the device on the table. She zoomed in slightly, focusing on the components, the movement of Darius's hands, the intensity in his expression. This wasn't just a student project. This was something real, something important. Lena lowered the camera slowly, her mind racing. Her documentary had started as an idea, a way to highlight overlooked struggles. But now, she was staring at something bigger than a story about survival. This was about impact. And if she was right, it could change everything. The next morning, the campus returned to life as if nothing had happened. Students filled the walkways again, voices rising, energy restored. The night had erased itself, leaving no trace behind, except in the minds of those who had lived it. Darius sat in the back row of his lecture hall, notebook open, pen in hand. From the outside, he looked like any other student. But inside, he was somewhere else, running calculations, replaying tests, thinking about improvements, always thinking. At the front of the room, a new presence commanded attention, Dr. Amelia Grant. Dr. Amelia Grant was a 45-year-old white woman, tall and composed with a posture that radiated authority. Her blonde hair was pulled back into a precise low bun, not a strand out of place. Her features were sharp, her expression controlled, her voice measured and clear. She dressed in neutral tones, tailored blazers, crisp shirts, everything about her intentional, efficient. Students described her as strict, but not unfair. Years earlier, Dr. Grant had built her career in a competitive research environment where mistakes weren't tolerated. Early in her career, she had trusted a colleague who later took credit for her work. That betrayal reshaped her approach. She became meticulous, cautious, and unwilling to overlook inconsistencies. She didn't assume. She verified. And lately, something didn't add up. After class, she stood alone in her office, reviewing system logs on her computer screen. Late-night lab access, repeated entries, always the same time window, always the same location. Her eyes narrowed slightly, not with suspicion but with curiosity. She didn't act immediately. Instead, she observed. Back on campus, Lena sat in a quiet corner of the library, reviewing her footage. Frame by frame. Darius working, Harold watching. The device. She paused the video on one moment. Darius adjusting a sensor, his face lit by the faint glow of the device's interface. There was something in his expression she couldn't ignore. Focus, belief, and something deeper. Urgency. Lena leaned back, exhaling slowly. "This is bigger than I thought," she whispered to herself. She flipped open her notebook and wrote, "Not just surviving, building something that shouldn't be possible." For the first time, she hesitated, not because she didn't want to continue, but because she realized what continuing might mean. This wasn't just documenting someone's life anymore. It was exposing something the system hadn't noticed yet, and once it did, there would be consequences. That night, Darius stood once again in the lab. Different room this time, lower level, hidden. The storage space Harold had mentioned. Dust-covered equipment lined the walls, forgotten machines sitting in silence. The air smelled faintly of metal and time. But to Darius, it was perfect. No interruptions, no eyes, no expectations. He set the device down, powering it on. The screen flickered. Stabilized. Data streamed across the interface. For a moment, everything held. Then, a minor fluctuation. Darius leaned closer, adjusting the calibration. Not failure, not yet, but not perfect either. He exhaled slowly. "Almost," he murmured. Above him, in another part of the building, Dr. Amelia Grant closed her laptop, her mind still on the logs she had reviewed. Elsewhere, Lena packed her camera into her bag, her decision not yet made, but forming. And in the quiet, hidden room below it all, Darius continued working. Unseen, unrecognized, but closer than ever. A week before the university exhibition, the campus changed its rhythm. Posters appeared overnight, clean, polished designs announcing the annual Biomedical Innovation Showcase. Screens across campus cycled through finalist names, highlighting the brightest minds, the most promising ideas. Students slowed their steps to look. Conversations shifted. Attention sharpened. For most, it was just another event. For a few, it was everything. Darius Coleman didn't expect his name to be there. He stood still in front of the digital board, the morning crowd moving around him, their voices blurring into background noise. His eyes locked onto the list, scanning once, then again. And there it was. Darius Coleman, low-cost portable diagnostic system. For a moment, he didn't react. Then his grip tightened slightly on the strap of his worn backpack. This wasn't supposed to happen. His project had never been officially submitted through the usual channels. It had been entered quietly, almost anonymously, through a faculty recommendation he didn't fully understand. He hadn't asked for it. But now, it was real. For the first time since he arrived at the university, people stopped walking past him. They looked. Some curious, some surprised, some skeptical. Darius felt it immediately. Not recognition, but attention. And attention came with weight. Behind him, a voice cut through the air. Well, that's unexpected. Darius turned slightly. Ethan Whitmore stood a few steps away, hands casually in his pockets. He looked the same as always, composed, controlled, but his eyes lingered a fraction longer than usual. Studying, measuring. Ethan stepped closer, glancing at the screen, then at Darius. "You've been busy," he said. The tone wasn't friendly, but it wasn't openly hostile either. It was something more precise. Darius didn't respond. He didn't know what to say, so he said nothing. Ethan gave a faint, almost polite smile, then walked past him without another word, but the look he left behind stayed. It wasn't disbelief, it was calculation. Later that afternoon, the engineering department held a preliminary review session for finalists. A closed-door meeting. Faculty members, a few sponsors, selected observers. Darius had never been inside that room before. The walls were lined with framed research achievements, past innovations that had shaped careers and reputations. The air felt heavier here, quiet, controlled, expectant. Darius stood near the far end of the room, hands loosely at his sides. Across from him, Ethan stood confidently, speaking with a faculty member as if he belonged there, which in many ways he did. Near the center table sat Professor Daniel Reeves, a 52-year-old white male department coordinator. He had a solid build, thinning dark hair, and a voice that carried authority without needing to rise. His expression was neutral, but his eyes were sharp, always evaluating. Years in academia had made him cautious. He valued reputation above all else. A single controversy could damage funding, partnerships, everything he had worked to maintain. Next to him, reviewing documents, was Dr. Amelia Grant. Her posture remained composed, her expression unreadable. She hadn't spoken to Darius yet, but she had noticed him. The session began routinely. Each finalist briefly introduced their project. Ethan spoke first. His presentation was clean, structured, confident. His device, a high-performance diagnostic system, was presented with polished language and precise technical detail. The room responded as expected. Approval, recognition, certainty. Then it was Darius's turn. He stepped forward, no slides, no prepared speech, just the device. He placed it on the table, his movements controlled, deliberate. "I built this to reduce cost barriers in early diagnosis," he said. His voice was steady, but quieter than Ethan's. Some leaned forward, others leaned back, listening, judging. He began explaining the structure, the approach, the limitations he had overcome. For a brief moment, the room shifted. Not dramatically, but enough. Interest, real interest, and that was when everything changed. Ethan stood up. The sound of the chair moving was small, but it cut through the room. "I need to address something," he said. All eyes turned toward him. Professor Reeves frowned slightly. "This isn't—" "It's important," Ethan continued, calm but firm. There was a pause. Then Reeves nodded once. "Go ahead." Ethan stepped forward, his gaze moving from the faculty to Darius. "I've reviewed the architecture of this device," he said, "and parts of it are identical to restricted research models stored in the university database." The room went still. Darius didn't move, didn't speak. Ethan continued. "Specifically, a dataset and structural framework that hasn't been publicly released." He let that settle, then added quietly, "Access to that material requires authorization." Silence deepened. Professor Reeves leaned forward slightly. "Are you suggesting—" "I'm suggesting," Ethan said, "that this project may not be entirely original." The words landed heavier than they sounded. Not an accusation, but close enough. All attention shifted to Darius. Waiting. Darius felt it. The weight of expectation, suspicion, doubt, all pressing in at once. He opened his mouth slightly, then stopped. What could he say? He hadn't accessed anything. He hadn't needed to, but proving absence was harder than proving presence. Dr. Amelia Grant finally spoke. Her voice was calm, measured. "Do you have evidence of unauthorized access?" Ethan didn't hesitate. "I requested system logs," he said, "late-night entries, repeated access to restricted lab spaces." Professor Reeves turned to the screen as an assistant pulled up the logs. There it was. Timestamps, dates, entries, all aligning with Darius's presence in the building at night. The room shifted again. Interest turned into uncertainty. Uncertainty into distance. No one said it directly, but the implication was clear. Darius stood still. His hands didn't shake, his expression didn't change. But inside, everything tightened. Across the room, the door opened slightly. Lena Brooks stood at the threshold. She hadn't been invited, but she had heard enough to come. She stepped inside, her presence drawing brief attention. "Those logs don't prove anything," she said. Her voice cut through the tension. Unexpected. Unfiltered. Professor Reeves frowned. "And you are?" "Lena Brooks, Journalism Department. This is a closed session." "I know," she said, "but you're making a decision based on assumption." A few faculty members exchanged looks. Uncomfortable. Dr. Grant watched silently. Lena stepped forward slightly, her gaze moving toward Darius, then back to the room. "You don't even know what he built yet," she said. "You're just reacting to where he was." Reeves's expression hardened. "This is not your place." Lena didn't back down. "Then whose is it?" she asked. Silence. Not agreement, not support, just silence. And silence was an answer. Professor Reeves exhaled slowly. "We cannot ignore potential misconduct," he said. "Until this is clarified, the project will be removed from the exhibition list." The words were formal, controlled, final. Darius didn't react immediately. Didn't argue, didn't protest. He simply nodded once, small, contained, as if accepting something he had expected long before it happened. Across the room, Ethan stepped back, his expression unchanged. Not triumphant, not guilty, just composed. Lena looked at Darius, disbelief flickering across her face. "This isn't right," she said, quieter now. But no one responded. In the back of the room, unnoticed by most, Harold Jenkins stood near the doorway. He had heard everything. His hands were still, his jaw tight. He knew the truth. He knew exactly why those logs existed. But speaking would mean explaining access. Unauthorized access, given by him, and that would cost him everything. So he stayed silent. And that silence sealed Darius's fate. Darius picked up his device, holding it carefully, as if it mattered more now than it had moments before. Then he turned and walked out. No one stopped him. No one called him back. Behind him, the room resumed its controlled discussion. Voices low, decisions moving forward without him. Like he had never been there at all. The city didn't change that night. Chicago still moved with the same restless rhythm. Cars passing in streaks of light. Distant sirens echoing between buildings, the elevated train slicing through the darkness above. The wind had picked up, sharper now, carrying a cold edge that cut through layers of clothing and settled deep into the bones. But for Darius Coleman, something had shifted. He walked into the engineering building the same way he always did. Quiet, unnoticed, pushing the janitor's cart past rows of glass doors and dim hallways. The fluorescent lights hummed faintly overhead, casting pale reflections across the polished floors. Everything looked the same. But he wasn't. Earlier that day, he had stood in a room where his work, his time, his purpose, had been reduced to suspicion. No evidence, no proof, just a narrative that fit too easily into place. And what stayed with him wasn't the accusation. It was the silence. Now, as he moved through the empty corridors, his posture was different. His shoulders no longer curved inward. His steps were steady, grounded, not heavy, not rushed. Deliberate. He reached the lower level without hesitation. The hidden storage room. Harold had left the door slightly ajar. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the faint metallic scent of old equipment. Shelves lined the walls, stacked with forgotten devices, outdated monitors, broken lab tools, discarded components. To most people, it was junk. To Darius, it was possibility. He set the janitor's cart aside and pulled his backpack onto the workbench. Then he took out the device. The one he had built. The one that had been questioned. He stared at it for a long moment, not with doubt, but with clarity. Then, without hesitation, he began to take it apart, piece by piece, carefully, intentionally. No frustration, no anger, just focus. Every wire disconnected, every sensor removed, every component placed in a precise line across the table. He wasn't fixing it. He was erasing it. Starting over. From nothing. Behind him, footsteps approached slowly. Harold Jenkins entered the room, stopping just inside the doorway. He didn't speak immediately. He watched. Darius didn't look up. "I figured you'd be here," Harold said after a moment. Darius kept working. "I can't use the same build," he said quietly. "Not anymore." Harold nodded, understanding without needing further explanation. "Different structure," Darius continued. "Different pathway, same outcome." Harold stepped closer, his eyes scanning the table. "You think you can do that overnight?" he asked. Darius paused briefly, then resumed. "I don't think I have a choice." Harold studied him for a moment longer. Then he walked toward one of the shelves, pulling down a small, dust-covered case. "You'll need better stability on your sensors," he said, placing it on the table. "These might help." Inside were older but intact calibration modules, unused, overlooked but functional. Darius glanced at them, then back at Harold. A silent acknowledgement passed between them. Harold leaned against the table, folding his arms. "You know," he said slowly, "when I was your age, I used to stay up nights like this too." Darius didn't stop working. "What happened?" he asked. Harold exhaled lightly. "Life," he said. "Responsibilities, choices I didn't think I had a choice in." There was no bitterness in his voice, just truth. "I kept telling myself I'd go back," Harold continued. "Finish what I started, build something that mattered." He looked around the room. "Instead, I stayed close enough to watch other people do it." Darius tightened a connection, testing the alignment. "Why didn't you?" he asked. Harold smiled faintly. "Because at some point, you stop asking what you want and start doing what you have to." Silence settled between them again. Then Harold stepped closer, his voice lower now. "But you're not there yet," he said. Darius looked up. For the first time that night, there was something in his eyes, something sharper than focus. "Don't let them decide that for you," Harold said. "Don't let them erase what you built, just because it doesn't fit what they expect." He paused, then added quietly, "I see myself in you." Darius held his gaze for a moment, then nodded once, and went back to work. Upstairs, in a quiet dorm room lit only by a desk lamp, Lena Brooks sat surrounded by scattered notes and equipment. Her camera rested in front of her, connected to her laptop. The footage from the past few nights played silently on the screen. Darius working, Harold observing, the device taking shape. She replayed the moment from earlier that day, the accusation, the silence, the decision. Her jaw tightened. "This isn't just a story anymore," she murmured. She leaned forward, opening a new file. Not notes this time. A broadcast setup. Lena had never done a live stream of this scale before. Her work had always been controlled, edited, structured, refined before anyone else saw it. But this needed to be real, unfiltered, immediate. She opened a streaming platform, testing connections, checking audio levels. Then she hesitated. Once this went live, there was no taking it back. No control over how people would react. No guarantee it would help. But she thought about Darius, about the way he had stood there, alone, while everyone else decided his story for him. And she made her choice. She clicked Prepare Stream. Across campus, another figure watched events unfold from a different perspective. Marcus Hale. Marcus Hale was a 41-year-old campus IT systems analyst, medium height, slightly stocky, with short dark hair beginning to gray at the temples. He wore glasses that he constantly adjusted when concentrating, and his posture carried the quiet fatigue of someone who spent most of his time behind screens. Marcus wasn't someone people noticed, but he noticed everything. Years ago, a data breach had nearly cost him his career, not because he caused it, but because he failed to catch it in time. Since then, he had become meticulous, careful, always double-checking, always verifying. That night, as he reviewed routine system activity, something caught his attention. Access logs, repeated entries, patterns that didn't quite align. He leaned closer to the screen, scrolling through timestamps. Late-night lab access, consistent, but not unauthorized in the way it had been presented. There were gaps, overlaps. Something about it didn't sit right. Marcus frowned slightly, making a note. He didn't act yet, but he didn't ignore it either. Back in the storage room, time moved differently. Hours passed without notice. The device on the table began to take shape again. Different layout, reconfigured structure, improved stabilization. Darius worked without pause, his movements efficient, precise. Fatigue tried to creep in, but he pushed past it. Because this wasn't just about proving something anymore, it was about reclaiming it. By the time the first hint of morning light filtered faintly through the narrow basement window, the device stood assembled once more. Not the same. Better. Darius powered it on. The screen flickered. Paused. Then stabilized. Data streamed cleanly. No fluctuation. No hesitation. For a moment, everything was still. Then Darius exhaled. Not relief, not yet, but something close. Harold, still there, gave a small nod. "That'll hold," he said. Darius didn't smile, but his shoulders eased slightly. Upstairs, Lena closed her laptop, the stream setup ready. Elsewhere, Marcus saved the log files for further review, and in the quiet space beneath it all, Darius stood over the device he had rebuilt from nothing. Not erased, not finished, but ready. The morning arrived with a strange stillness, as if the city itself was holding its breath. Chicago's sky remained overcast, the same gray weight lingering above the skyline. But the campus felt different. Charged, expectant. People moved faster, spoke louder, dressed sharper. Today wasn't just another day. It was the day everything would be decided. The exhibition hall stood at the center of it all. A wide, polished space filled with rows of displays, projection screens, and carefully arranged booths. Bright overhead lights reflected off glass panels and metal frames, giving the room a clean, almost clinical feel. By mid-morning, the hall was full, investors in tailored suits, faculty members in composed clusters, students gathered in groups, whispering, pointing, watching. Cameras were set up near the front. Every movement, every word carried weight. Darius Coleman stood just outside the entrance. He wasn't on the list anymore. He wasn't supposed to be here. He wore the same clothes as always, clean, but worn. His posture was steady, his expression calm. In his hand he held a small case. Inside it, the device, rebuilt, refined, ready. He didn't step in immediately. Instead, he watched through the glass doors as the event began without him. Inside, Ethan Whitmore stood at the center of the room. Everything about him matched the setting perfectly. His presentation station was polished, organized, professional. A sleek device sat at the center, metallic casing, clean interface, every detail engineered for visual impact. Behind him, a large screen displayed structured slides, graphs, and technical diagrams. Confidence surrounded him. Not forced, earned, or at least accepted as such. Near the front row sat a new presence, Victoria Langford, a 49-year-old venture capital investor, tall, composed, with a commanding presence that drew attention without effort. Her posture was straight, her movements controlled. Her sharp green eyes missed nothing. She wore a tailored black suit, minimal accessories, everything about her precise and intentional. Years ago, Victoria had built her reputation by backing unconventional innovators, people others overlooked. But she had also learned the cost of being wrong. One failed investment had nearly collapsed her firm, forcing her to become more selective, more skeptical. She didn't invest in ideas. She invested in certainty. And today, she was watching closely. Across the room, Dr. Amelia Grant stood near the faculty table, her arms lightly folded, her gaze fixed forward. She had said little since the previous session, but her attention had sharpened. She wasn't just observing anymore, she was waiting. The presentation began. Ethan stepped forward, his voice clear, controlled, practiced. He walked through the structure of his device, explaining each component, each function, each advantage. The audience followed easily. His delivery was smooth, his confidence unshaken. Everything was going exactly as expected. Until it wasn't. Ethan turned toward the device. "Now I'll demonstrate real-time functionality," he said. He activated the system. The screen lit up. Data initialized. For a brief moment, it held. Then, a flicker. Subtle, almost unnoticeable. Ethan paused, just slightly, then continued. The system recalibrated, then flickered again. This time, more visible. A line of data lagged, then another. A faint murmur moved through the audience. Ethan adjusted something quickly. The system responded, but not correctly. A delay, a misread, a small error, but in a room like this, small errors didn't stay small. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy, evaluating, questioning. Ethan's posture remained controlled, but something in his expression shifted. Barely, but enough. He tried to stabilize the system again, but the flaw was already visible. And once seen, it couldn't be unseen. Across the room, Victoria Langford leaned forward slightly. Interested, now, not in the success, but in the failure. Dr. Amelia Grant's eyes narrowed just a fraction. Not surprised, not satisfied, just attentive. Near the back, unnoticed by most, Lena Brooks stood beside a pillar. Her camera steady in her hands, she had started the stream. Quietly, without announcement. The footage was live. Her heart was racing, but her hands didn't shake. She wasn't filming a moment. She was capturing a turning point. Outside the hall, Darius watched through the glass. He saw the hesitation, the flicker, the shift in the room. He didn't move at first, then he exhaled and stepped forward. Inside, the tension continued to build. Ethan stepped back slightly, regaining composure, attempting to explain the inconsistency, but the room had already changed. Attention was no longer fixed on him. It was searching for something else, for an answer. And that was when the door opened. The sound wasn't loud, but in the silence, it carried. Heads turned. Darius Coleman walked in. No announcement, no introduction. Just presence. He moved through the room with steady steps, the small case in his hand, his gaze forward. Some recognized him. Others didn't. But everyone felt the shift. He stopped near the center. Not at Ethan's station, not at the front, just where he could be seen. Professor Daniel Reeves stood quickly, his expression tightening. "You're not scheduled to present," he said. Darius met his gaze. "I know." His voice was calm, controlled. Reeves hesitated. "This isn't—" "Give me 10 minutes," Darius said. The room stilled. Not loud, not forceful, but certain. Reeves looked toward the faculty table. Uncertainty flickered across his face. This wasn't procedure. This wasn't controlled. This was risk. And risk, especially in front of investors, was something he avoided. But before he could respond, Dr. Amelia Grant spoke. "Let him speak." Her voice cut cleanly through the room. Reeves turned toward her. This could— "Let him speak," she repeated, not louder, but final. There was a pause, long enough for the room to feel it. Then Reeves stepped back, reluctantly, silently. Permission granted. Darius didn't thank anyone, didn't look around. He simply stepped forward, placing the case on the table. Across from him, Ethan stood still, watching, not speaking. For the first time since the presentation began, he wasn't in control of the room. Darius opened the case slowly. Inside, the device rested. Simpler, less polished, but precise, intentional, real. He placed it on the table. No slides, no setup, no explanation, just the device. He looked up once, scanning the room, not searching for approval, not asking for belief, just acknowledging presence. Then he spoke. 10 minutes. Nothing more. No pitch, no defense, no argument, just a statement. And the room waited. The room didn't move. It held itself in place, every breath, every shifting glance, every unspoken judgment suspended in a fragile balance, the kind of silence that only exists when something irreversible is about to happen. Darius Coleman stood at the center of it. No slides behind him, no prepared visuals, no structured presentation. Just a device. And 10 minutes. He didn't rush. Didn't look toward the faculty. Didn't acknowledge Ethan. Instead, he reached forward and powered the device on. A soft hum broke the silence. The small screen flickered to life. Clean, stable, controlled. No delay, no hesitation. Darius stepped slightly to the side, giving the audience a clear view. "This system is designed for early-stage detection," he said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried. Not because of volume, but because of certainty. Low cost, portable, built to operate without centralized infrastructure. He paused briefly, not for effect, for precision. Then he continued. "The structure is modular," he said, pointing to the internal components as he carefully opened part of the casing. Each unit can be replaced independently, no specialized tools required. He wasn't presenting. He was showing. Every movement intentional. Every explanation grounded in real-time demonstration. Across the room, heads leaned forward, even those who had doubted him before. Because this wasn't theory. It was proof. Darius adjusted a sensor, then ran a live input. The data streamed across the screen, smooth, consistent, responsive. No fluctuation, no instability. Perfect. Professor Daniel Reeves shifted slightly in his seat, his expression tightening. not in disapproval but in recognition of something he hadn't expected. Dr. Amelia Grant stood still, her eyes fixed on the device, her focus sharpened to a single point. She wasn't evaluating anymore. She was verifying. Across from Darius, Ethan Whitmore didn't move. His posture remained composed. But his gaze, it had changed. For the first time, there was something in it that hadn't been there before. Uncertainty. Darius continued. "The system doesn't rely on restricted datasets," he said calmly. "It builds its own baseline through adaptive calibration." He tapped the interface again. New data appeared. Adjusted, refined, live. "And it corrects in real time," he added. He didn't look at Ethan when he said it, but the room did. A quiet shift passed through the audience. Not loud, but unmistakable. Near the back, Lena Brooks stood steady, her camera capturing everything. The stream had gone beyond campus. Comments flooded in. View counts rising. What started as a quiet recording had become something else entirely. People weren't just watching. They were reacting. "This is live?" Wait, he built that? They removed him for this. Lena didn't read them. She didn't need to. She could feel it. The moment had moved beyond the room. It belonged to something larger now. In a small office across campus, Marcus Hale sat in front of his monitors, eyes locked on the system logs he had saved earlier. He replayed the access records again, this time slower, more precise. And that's when he saw it. Not the entries themselves, but the overlap. 2 access points, same time, different credentials. Marcus leaned forward, adjusting his glasses. "That's not right," he murmured. He cross-referenced the IDs. One belonged to the maintenance access, Harold's authorization. The other, faculty-level clearance. He froze for a moment, then pulled up the credential mapping. The name appeared. Ethan Whitmore Marcus sat back slightly, processing. This wasn't a coincidence. This was manipulation. He didn't hesitate. He exported the logs and started moving. Back in the exhibition hall, Darius stepped back slightly from the device. He had said enough, shown enough. He didn't need to convince them anymore. The device had done that. Silence filled the space again, but it wasn't the same silence as before. This one carried weight. Realization. Across the room, Victoria Langford leaned back slowly, her eyes still fixed on the table. Not impressed, not surprised, but certain this was real. Professor Reeves cleared his throat, preparing to speak. But before he could, the side door opened. Marcus Hale stepped inside. He wasn't dressed for the event. Simple button-up shirt, slightly wrinkled ID badge still clipped to his pocket. His posture was hesitant, but his steps were firm. People turned, confused, interrupted. Marcus didn't look at them. He walked straight toward the front. "Sorry," he said, slightly out of breath. "This needs to be seen." Reeves frowned. "This isn't... It's about the logs," Marcus said. That word, logs, shifted the room again. Dr. Amelia Grant turned toward him immediately. "What did you find?" she asked. Marcus stepped forward, connecting his tablet to the main display without waiting for permission. The screen changed. Access records appeared, timestamps, credential IDs, clear, unfiltered. "There are 2 sets of entries," Marcus explained, his voice steadier now. "Maintenance access and a secondary authorization running at the same time." He highlighted the overlap, which means someone else was in the system. The room leaned in. Marcus pulled up the credential match. The name appeared. Ethan Whitmore Silence. Not uncertain this time, definitive. Ethan didn't speak, didn't move. For a moment, everything around him seemed to slow. The weight of the room shifted fully, not toward Darius, but away from him, toward the truth. Professor Reeves looked from the screen to Ethan, his expression tightening. "This is accurate?" he asked. Marcus nodded. "Yes, sir. Verified." Dr. Amelia Grant stepped forward slightly, her gaze fixed on Ethan. "Would you like to explain?" she asked. Her tone wasn't accusatory, but it didn't need to be. Ethan's composure held for a second longer, then cracked, not visibly, not dramatically, but enough. His silence said everything. Across the room, Lena's camera captured it all, every shift, every realization, every unspoken admission. The comments surged, the stream exploded, and in the center of it all, Darius stood still, not victorious, not relieved, just present. Because this was never about proving them wrong. It was about revealing what was already true. The silence that followed the reveal didn't break all at once. It shifted, slowly, like a room learning how to breathe again. No one spoke immediately after Marcus Hale's evidence filled the screen. The weight of what had just happened settled across every face. Faculty, investors, students, each processing it in their own way. A few moments earlier, the room had been ready to move on without Darius Coleman. Now, no one could look away from him. Professor Daniel Reeves stood first. His usual composure tightened into something more controlled, more careful. He cleared his throat, glancing briefly at the investors before speaking. "It appears that there has been a significant error in judgment," he said. The words were measured, but they carried the weight of admission. Dr. Amelia Grant didn't look at Reeves. She looked at Darius. For a long second. Then she nodded once. Not formally, not publicly, just enough to acknowledge what had been proven. Across the room, Ethan Whitmore remained still, his posture upright but hollowed of its earlier certainty. The polished confidence he had carried into the room had drained into silence. He didn't argue, didn't defend himself. For the first time, his presence felt smaller, and the room adjusted accordingly. Attention moved, fully to Darius. Victoria Langford rose from her seat, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor as she approached the center. Up close, her presence was even more commanding, her gaze sharp, her expression unreadable, her movements deliberate. She stopped a few feet from the table, from the device, from Darius. "You built this," she said. It wasn't a question. Darius met her gaze. "Yes." Victoria studied him. Not just the device, not just the explanation, but him. His posture, his stillness, the absence of performance. "Under these conditions?" she asked. Darius didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. "Yes." A brief pause, then Victoria nodded. "Good," she said. She turned slightly, addressing the room without raising her voice. "This is what innovation looks like when it isn't handed to you." No applause followed. Not yet. But something shifted again, this time deeper. Recognition. Real recognition. Reeves stepped forward quickly, adjusting his tone. "Given the circumstances, the committee will reconvene to—" "There's no need," Victoria interrupted. Her voice wasn't loud, but it ended the sentence. She looked back at Darius. "My firm is interested," she said. "Funding, development, clinical pathway." A ripple moved through the room. Investors exchanged glances, some recalculating, some catching up, because the moment had already passed, and she had moved first. Darius didn't react immediately, not out of hesitation, but because he wasn't used to moments like this. Opportunities had never arrived like this before. They had always been something distant, conditional, fragile. Now one stood directly in front of him, and it was real. Across the room, Lena Brooks lowered her camera slightly. The stream was still running. The numbers had climbed higher than anything she had ever seen. Comments moved faster than she could read. Reactions pouring in from people who had never set foot on this campus, never known Darius existed. Until now. She turned the camera back toward him, capturing the moment as it unfolded. Not staged, not edited. Unfiltered. And that was what made it powerful. Later that afternoon, after the hall had begun to empty, Darius stepped outside. The air was colder now, the wind stronger, but it felt different, lighter. The noise of the city returned, cars, footsteps, distant voices, but it no longer pressed against him the same way. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't walking against it. He stood still for a moment, taking it in. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. His hand hesitated, just slightly. Then he dialed. The line rang once, twice, then, "Hello!" The voice on the other end was familiar, warm, tired. Angela Coleman. His mother, a 49-year-old African-American woman, medium height, with a strong but gentle presence shaped by years of work and quiet resilience. Her hands bore the marks of long shifts at the hospital. Her posture often weighed down by fatigue, but her voice always carried strength. She had raised Darius alone, worked through illness, through exhaustion, through everything, and she had never once let him see her break. "Ma," Darius said. His voice held steady at first, then softened. "I'm still in school." There was a pause. On the other end of the line, silence. Not confusion, not disbelief, just processing. Then, a breath, shaky, emotional. What?" she asked quietly. "I'm not dropping out," he said. "I don't have to." This time the silence broke, not with words, but with something deeper. Relief, pride, everything she hadn't allowed herself to expect. "I told you," she said softly. "I told you you'd find your way." Darius closed his eyes briefly, not because he needed to, but because, for the first time, he could. Back inside the building, Harold Jenkins stood near the far end of the hallway. He hadn't gone into the center of the room earlier, hadn't stood beside Darius, hadn't spoken. He didn't need to. Now, he leaned lightly against the wall, watching from a distance as people moved around, conversations shifting, narratives rewriting themselves in real time. He saw Darius through the glass doors outside, standing, taller, different. Harold smiled. Small. Quiet. The kind of smile that didn't ask for acknowledgement. Because this was enough. Nearby, Dr. Amelia Grant stepped into the hallway, her gaze following the same line of sight. She stood beside Harold for a moment, not speaking. Then, "He's not done," she said. Harold glanced at her. "No," he replied. "He's just getting started." Dr. Grant nodded once, then added, "There's a research position opening next semester." Harold didn't respond, but he understood, and outside, Darius remained on the call a moment longer, listening, smiling, just slightly, before finally lowering the phone. Across campus, Lena uploaded the footage. She titled it simply, "The Student They Tried to Erase." Within hours, it spread. Across platforms, across cities, across conversations that had nothing to do with engineering, or exhibitions, or academic rankings, because it wasn't about that anymore. It was about what people chose to believe, and what they ignored. In the days that followed, the device entered early-stage evaluation for real-world application. Small clinics expressed interest. Community organizations reached out, not because it was perfect, but because it was possible, and possibility was enough to begin. The city didn't stop. It never did, but somewhere within its constant motion, something had shifted, not loudly, not completely, but enough. Enough for one story to change direction, and for others to start asking questions they hadn't asked before. This story reminds us that the world does not always judge based on truth. Sometimes people are judged by what they look like, where they come from, or what others choose to believe about them. In everyday life, we may not stand in a courtroom or on a stage, but we all face moments where we are misunderstood, overlooked, or treated unfairly. The lesson is not only to stay strong when that happens, but also to be careful not to become the ones who judge too quickly. Darius did not win because he argued louder. He won because he stayed focused, kept building, and let his actions speak when the time came. That is a powerful reminder for all of us. Instead of reacting with anger, we can respond with preparation. Instead of giving up when others doubt us, we can keep working quietly until the truth becomes undeniable. This story also challenges us to look at how we treat people around us every day. Do we give others a fair chance, or do we make decisions based on assumptions? Respect should not depend on status, background, or appearance. A small change in how we see others can create a big change in the world around us. If this story touched you, take a moment to share it with someone who might need encouragement today. Let us know in the comments where you are watching from and what part of the story stayed with you the most. Do not forget to subscribe so you can be part of more stories that inspire and make us think. May God bless everyone watching this video. If you believe in justice, resilience, and the power of truth, comment Amen below to stand with this message.